All right, so I told you earlier that the poll wasn't up. It is up. It is up. Forgive me. It is up. It's very much so there and active. We've already got about 450 votes or so. And the question was, former Chief Justice Mogoeng says he knows he's called to be president. Would you vote for Mogoeng as president? And basically the options are yes, no, undecided. So as it stands right now, with still a good hour or so to go on the program, 56% of the voters have said yes, 36% no, and 7% undecided. So that's the poll that we're running at the moment. There's some comments there too, but we'll read those a bit later on. Now, Parliament's Portfolio Committee on Communications will today interview the remaining candidates who had applied for the positions of SABC board members. The committee shortlisted 37 candidates to fill vacancies on the board of the SABC. The interviews are conducted by a special nominations committee composed of a 7-member panel. Those who get appointed as board members will replace the current board members whose term comes to an end on the 15th of October. Head of Programs at Media Monitoring Africa, Thandi Smith, joins us for this conversation. Thandi, good to have you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, good morning to you and the viewers. It's good to be with you this morning.
So let's start. I mean, let's just start this off, I suppose, on the simplest level. What is the role of the board at the end of the day at the SABC? What is the purpose of having a board of directors to serve in an organization like the SABC?
Well, I think the bottom line is that the board needs to hold a completely independent position, ensuring that the public broadcaster is functional, it's sustainable, and it fulfills its public mandate of serving the public interest when it comes to public interest broadcasting. It offers a strategic oversight, governance oversight, and essentially it's to ensure the functioning of the SABC.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's been a very bumpy ride for the SABC for more than a decade. I mean, that we can, unfortunately attest to. What is your assessment of the past decade? Your view on the boards that have been managing the SABC so far, including the outgoing board? And we know that some of the outgoing board are interviewing for a second term as well.
Yes, so I think what's important to note here is that it is the first time in well over a decade that we've actually seen a board fulfill the entire term, the entire board term. So I think that sort of sets the tone of the conversation. For the first time in over a decade, we are actually going through this process that is put in place to see the entire end to the board term. What we have seen, however, over that decade, well over a decade, is the institution moving from crisis to crisis. It's been plagued by political interference, editorial interference, funding crises, resource crises. We've been through the retrenchment process, which I think was not handled as best as it could have been handled, to say, very, very mildly. And what we have seen is we all made it through the sort of Thandi Smith era. So again, we've seen an SABC in crisis, but also the last couple of years with this current board, we have seen really good developments take place. This isn't to say that the current board hasn't also had its own challenges, its own internal issues. But what we have seen is some really good outcomes from the board term. We've seen 2 really good inquiries taking place on editorial interference and harassment within the SABC. So I think we at a point where it's critical that we get the skills needed to continue driving the SABC forward in this digital era, where we have a sustainable model for public broadcasting. And I think that's the real challenge here, is to find that sustainable model without the political interference that we have seen taking place at the institution over the last decade.
Yeah, and there's also been a lot of talk, and particularly over these last few days of interviews, and to those that are serving on the board because, as I have said, I mean, their term ends on the 15th of October. And they were there at the time of the major restructuring, the Section 189 here at the SABC. I mean, we saw about 620 of our colleagues being retrenched in some form or the other, and then suddenly realizing that, we don't have some skills, and then started rehiring. And there's still arguments as to whether this was the right way to go or not. Same thing when it comes to, and this is an interesting twist of events, the blame game when it came to the axing of the former head of news, Patiswe Makopeni, who is actually one of the candidates for the board as well, which is going to be interesting. And that was a discussion that they also had, and the board saying, no, they had no say in that. And I mean, so it just seems like I'm not convinced that there seems to be a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm not sure that the board is fulfilling its mandate. What do you think? I mean, do you think that they are doing a good job at the SABC?
Well, I think that the current board inherited a SABC in absolute crisis. So they were set up with a task that almost seemed impossible at the time. And, I think, again, given the very real challenges, given the human resource challenges, given the resource capacity challenges, again, it's would we have seen a different outcome with a different board? We won't know that. But again, what we do know is, yes, there have been instances where the board could have dealt with issues better, like mentioned, and you've mentioned, with the retrenchment process. But again, it is one of these things where you sort of look back and say, well, what would we have done in that situation? What could we have done better? And I think it's what we have seen from the experiences of this board will be incredibly valuable to the incoming board members on what to do going forward and how to manage these challenges and crises better. I think that it's I think we shouldn't be ignorant to think that we won't be dealing with challenges and crises going forward. So again, it's keeping in mind the critical, what's really important here. And again, like we're dealing with skills, we were dealing with skills issues within the SABC. We need to have the same approach with the board, in that we have to have the relevant skills needed for this era. And what we are seeing seems to be politicking. It seems to be candidates making the shortlist because of political party agreement, and not because of the skills needed at the front. And I think that's what we need to be focusing on right now.
Yeah, I mean, there are many questionable decisions that that get made. I mean, I just take one instance and one that was really called out, and it's still something that we're looking at, is that proposed deal between the SABC and Prime Media for sales, for Prime Media to take over the sales of the SABC. And one has to ask, a competitor taking over the public broadcaster's sales? It just, sometimes you have to ask questions and say, where do they come from? I mean, it is the same as when it comes to the retrenchments. I mean, when we look at the retrenchments, a lot of staff, obviously, as I mentioned, lost their jobs or decided to take the respective packages. But the SABC is still in a financial crisis. Management, let's turn our attention there, because I know that this is something that's been spoken a lot when it comes to the interviews and some of the questions asked about management and governance and the lack thereof. What fundamentally is the problem at the SABC when it comes to running it? Because one would think that this should be a profitable organization.
Well, I think that one of the big things or big issues that we often tend to forget is that the entire media industry is struggling. The entire media industry is facing sustainability issues. The entire media industry is facing funding challenges and having to restructure, rethink, reimagine what a funding model would look like. And it's even more challenging for an institution like the public broadcaster that is set up to serve the public interest. And it's not to say that the public broadcaster doesn't have the same challenges as the rest of the media environment. So how do you continue filling that public mandate, serving the public interest, while dealing with these very real crises? I don't think we have, or let me rather say, there hasn't seemed to be any single media institution, media house, that hasn't faced these challenges, that hasn't had to go through retrenchment processes or downsizing and sort of redefining what it means to be a media operating in these times. And so it's not simply, the tried and tested management responsibilities or management skills that historically may have worked. It's a combination of digital skills, technical skills, management skills, and all the while safeguarding the institution from political interference. And that is one, to say quite bluntly, that is one of the biggest issues that the institution has faced over the years, is this political will to control and to manage within the SABC. And unless we get that under control, unless we have a completely independent board serving the interests of the SABC and the people, and not of politicians, I think we're going to see very similar challenges going forward. So it really is about ensuring the independence, and also ensuring that we retain the public interest mandate of the SABC.
So quite an interesting list of candidates. I mean, 37 candidates. It'll be whittled down to 12, I think. I think that's the final number we're looking for.
Yes,
to start. And I mean, if you go through some of the names, obviously the one that's getting a little bit of sort of a pushback is Ms. Mamadoupi Mohlala. I think there's drama around her and her dismissal from her previous position, but she is already serving on the board, wants to come in for a second time. So that's one that's being that jumped out. Professor Sats Cooper is also in the running for it. I did mention a bit earlier that Ms. Patiswa Magopeni, also one of the candidates, and we know that she, of course, was the GE of News until recently, and now she, of course, was axed from that position, now also a candidate for the board. Also another interesting one, Thandeka Qubule Mbeki, also a former employee here at the SABC. And then another interesting one, I mean, there's so many, but Magdalene Munsami, who is currently the advocate for Kelly Khumalo. So it's a very differing, and that's only just a few that I've mentioned. I could go through all of them and we'd find them interesting. What are your views of the candidates that are running at the moment?
Well, like you say, we see a list of 37 candidates that need to be downsized to 12. And what I think one of the critiques of the process is that the Parliament only gave the public about a day to comment on the shortlist before the interview started. So it was very difficult to fully engage and participate, given the very short timelines that we've seen. So that is one of the critiques. And I think that given the candidates that we do see, again, it speaks to what candidates are making the list, given based on what criteria. And it does seem, like I mentioned before, it seems to be plagued with politics. We saw the process of the shortlisting candidates be made by party agreement, not only based on skills and need. Clearly, there's some brilliant candidates on the list, and candidates that are questionable. And you have to ask the question of why are some particular candidates making the list, based on what skills and whose interests would those candidates serve?
Can I be as bold as to ask? I mean, for you, who would you say are questionable candidates? Who are the names that jump out at you as those that say, oh, hang on, what are they doing there?
Well, I mean, like you mentioned, for one, Ms. Mamadoupi. There've been a lot of questions around her role in and outside of the SABC, and so you do have to ask what interests are being served. that was one of the names that stood out right in the very beginning when we had our initial look at the shortlist. And so we have to just really push and lobby for the best interest of the public to serve, and that is Parliament's role. And if they don't fulfill that mandate, then they fail to serve the public.
Yeah, Thandi, when we talk about one day for commentary, to the names being published, and one day for public commentary, surely that in itself is not a good thing. If we're wanting the editorial safeguards, and we want to make sure, particularly in a period where we're going into, we've got the leadership contest for the head of the ANC at the moment that is going to be the very big story coming through in December, and that editorial safeguarding is a big thing. One day to comment, where we're sitting on general elections going to be coming up in 2024, this decision, and having a public broadcaster that is very independent and safeguarded from interference is at the heart of a public broadcaster that the public depend on. So, one day to comment? It's a bit of a worry.
Yeah, exactly. It is a bit of a worry, especially when you see the process of how the candidates were shortlisted, which seemed to be a very political move. And exactly as you say, we're heading into a couple of years where it's very uncertain times. It's very what we see is filled with politicking. I think we're already seeing the campaigning for 2024 taking place. And the role of a public broadcaster during elections is even more critical than at any other point in any kind of functional democracy. And, we as MMA will be, as we do, monitoring the content and monitoring the strategic governance of the SABC and ensuring that we don't see political interference happening. But we have to lay our trust in Parliament to ensure a transparent process.
All right, we leave it there. Thandi, thanks for talking to us. Thandi Smith, the head of programs at Media Monitoring Africa, giving a comment on the interviews that are currently taking place this is for the board of the SABC, and this is as Parliament Communication Portfolio Committee interviews them, and I think the interviews end today. 37 candidates to be whittled down to 12. All right, just gone 8. Let's get the news. SK standing by.